The Jones may file an action in court asking the court to quiet the title in their favor. What if the Jones would have asked permission from the true owners? If the Jones had permission to use the lot, the use would not have been hostile. Therefore, the Jones would not meet the requirements for adverse possession. What if the Jones did not build a fence on the property, but occasionally parked their horse trailer on the property? The use would not be considered continuous, and therefore would prevent the Jones from obtaining title through adverse possession. By law, a property owned by a government entity or agency may not be lost to another through adverse possession. In other jurisdictions without the property tax rule, property owners who are not using their property should inspect it periodically to verify the property is not being used by another party who may attempt to claim ownership through adverse possession. Eminent domain. Eminent domain refers to the right of the government to seize property owned privately for government use. The process through which the government acquires title to the property is condemnation. If a government takes property under the doctrine of eminent domain through condemnation, the owner of the property must be compensated. The owner must be compensated according to the market value of the rights taken by the government. If a governmental agency decides they need a particular piece of property, they will usually attempt to negotiate with the property owner to purchase the property. If the property owner is unwilling to consider selling the property, the governmental agency may proceed with condemnation proceedings. Through the condemnation proceedings, the government asks the courts to force the transfer of the property to the government. The courts will determine the fair market value of the property. The government must show that the property is necessary for the public good. The property owner must be amenable to selling the property. The property owner may be amenable to selling the property, but may not agree with the government on the fair market value of the property. If the property owner and the government are unable to agree upon a fair purchase price, the government may resort to condemnation. Again, the court will be asked to determine the fair market value of the property. Both sides will most likely present evidence supporting their assessment of the fair market value of the property. Condemnation proceedings can be very lengthy. Governments may want a particular piece of property for a school, community center, freeway exit, road expansion, or any other facility which may benefit the general public. In 2005, the United States Supreme Court dramatically changed the allowed use of eminent domain. Traditionally, eminent domain is only available to government entities for the public good. Private entities could not acquire title through eminent domain. In Kelo versus the City of New London, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled eminent domain could be used to force the sale of property to a private entity. The case involved a developer who wanted to purchase some property from 9 different landowners to be used in a large development which included commercial and residential use. The 9 landowners refused to sell the property to the developer. The developer asked the city to condemn the property and force the sale. While the development arguably benefited the public, this was a new use of condemnation because the new owner of the property was a private entity rather than a government entity. The case was appealed until it reached the United States Supreme Court. The court found that the use for the property satisfied the public use requirement necessary to justify condemnation. The Supreme Court's decision stirred much controversy. The court's decision left it up to individual states to decide what constituted public use and benefit. In response to the court's decision, many states have passed or are in the process of passing laws which narrowly define what constitutes public use. Courts interpret public use differently. Some courts require the government to prove the ground subject to the condemnation proceedings is necessary for the government's project. If the government may feasibly accomplish the purposes of the project without condemning the property, many courts will require the government to do so. Lien foreclosure. A lien holder possesses a right to force the sale of real property in order to satisfy a debt secured by the lien. The lien may have been placed on the property with or without the consent of the owner. Depending on the type of lien, the lien holder may or may not need the courts to force the sale of the property. For example, many mortgages grant the lender the right to force the sale of the property without the direction of a court.